So we got our door skin shaped, got our bead in it. Now we need to transfer the door skin to the door top. We've got a couple of options here where we're going to put our seam. Are we going to do it down low, weld it in here, above the bead, or right through the middle of the bead? We're going to go right through the middle of the bead. We're going to measure our beads to be sure they're the same. 1.12, 1.12. So our beads are the same width. So what I'll do is I'm going to cut it off low right here. Down low, we're just going to cut it low, and I'll come back and trim a real nice line. Then we'll lay it up over the top of this, find a trim center, and then we will trim it and tack weld it together. So I'm just going to draw a line here as far as 10 snips. No certain whatever. Whenever you're doing a patch panel, as much information as you can transfer from one panel to the next, the better off you are. Even if it's something you don't think you're going to need, if you just have, you know, just a reference. See, I'm going right through the center of those bolts to give me a reference of where everything is. So that right there, you know, that line, I can transfer that onto the new panel. When we stamp our new impression in there, using the other door skin we have and everything, we'll be able to get real close to exactly where they were originally. So now we can go ahead and cut this off. We'll keep this piece. We'll take this off. This is the where the door handle bolts to. That's the nut plate. So we'll have to fix it because obviously one of the nuts is gone. Everything you work on these old cars, you got to fix. It's the best. Got us a nice straight, a relatively nice straight edge there. We can go over to our new door skin, lay this up there. We can see, you know, it's going to be pretty straightforward putting it on right here. We'll talk a little bit about a little bit of definitions. We could have welded it below the seam or above the seam. I'm choosing to go through the center of the seam for the simple reason of we're going to have less shrinkage. One term that people use when they say when it's welded, they say that it's warped. It warped it. Well, it didn't warp it, it shrunk it. You got all the molecules in a line here. Everybody's happy, everybody's cool. As soon as you heat it though, the molecules get to moving and they're not as strong because now they're molten kind of. Real elastic, very elastic. Everything else is very strong, so it shoves towards it and it pushes it down. So it just like that, and it makes a shrink, and that's all that's happened. And so once it's cooled off, in order to get everybody back in line, just like your kids at home, you got to take a hammer to them and beat them back in place. Right? I never hit my kids with a hammer yet, but I've got hammers. So, but that's how you control your distortion or your shrinkage in a weld. It's not warped. When you're welding, you're just getting a little shrinkage. The panel is happy. Both pieces are happy before you weld them together, and then you weld them and it gets a little crazy on you. Don't think that it's warped and it's out of control. It's just shrunk in that area. And if you go back and just hammer and dolly the area where you've welded, then it's going to come right back to where it wants to be. For instance, like when we put a roof insert in a car, we'll talk about it on that car when we do the roof insert. Sometimes you'll weld it and it'll droop down in the middle, boom, it'll pop down. Well, your first instinct is to go up and hit it in the middle, you know, and knock it back up. But that's not the problem. If everything was happy before you welded it, and as soon as you welded it, boom, pops down, then you know that the problem is from where you welded it. And so if you resist your first instinct to go in there and start slapping where it fell, And just go over there where you hammered and just start hammering dolly in that area where you welded. Just hammer dolly. Pretty soon it's going to get happy again, and that's going to go boom right back to where it was. Just kind of change your vocabulary. Just go in it thinking, if I weld this, it's going to shrink. No matter what you do. You see the guys with the air hose trying to keep it from warping. It's better just to tack it real nice, hammer your tacks, get it happy, and then weld it and then hammer it, instead of trying to air hose and all this other crap. We got it clecoed together. We're going to double check everything, be sure our bead's the right width. Okay, we're starting to get a little wide in the front. So that tells me I need to move these two clecos. See, I can make it wider or narrower just by rolling it. We were a little wide. Keep yourself open, and you try not to box yourself in, so you can come back and make needed corrections. That's real good right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill a new cleco hole. Alright, so now then we'll scribe it, we'll put some witness marks, and then we'll weld it. You know, you get everything fitted and it fits bitching and everything. Always trust your scribe line. There's a couple lines we're going to put on here. One will be your main trim line. And it's just going to go right here along the and then we'll trim this with 10 snips. Another reason I use 10 snips to get my final cut is because with enough practice with 10 snips, you can split that line in half and duplicate it perfectly. You can follow if there's any inconsistency in your scribe line, you know it's not perfectly dead straight, then you can follow it with your 10 snips. You can, you know, if it's got a little wave in it, follow it. But trust that line, you know, stay on that line. Only draw one line, don't put a bunch of lines. The line that I'm drawing across the two pieces is what they call a witness mark. And this is what we're going to use to keep us in proper positioning. So this panel has an arc in it, right? So if I didn't have these witness marks and I just started welding it together, if it started losing its form, you know, if it got pushed down too far or raised up too high, then the door is going to have either too much crown or not enough crown in it, you know. So you got to really pay attention to your witness marks. They're there to tell you what's going on. When you tack a panel together, you want to start at one end and tack, 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 tack. Because if you need to adjust it around by hand or move it or curve it to get these to line up, you want to do that. Because if you just tacked it here and then you tack it down here, now this thing is locked. It's locked. You can't. You have zero control. We'll always watch our witness marks. Be sure that we're not losing it. The witness marks are your best friends. They'll tell you if you're getting out of shape, if you're losing it or whatever. Because if you had a piece that was neutral, that fit well, and you had a good scribe and it fit well, and then you put it up there with a clamp or two and it fits well, and you start tacking it, if it starts losing itself, you know, it's drooping or whatever, then you can, with your witness marks, you can look and see, oh, I need to pull this thing down, or I need to push this thing up and get it back in line, and it'll come right back to you every time. Trust your scribe line and trust your witness marks no matter what's going on out in the middle of the panel. Don't even worry about what's going out in the middle. We're only concerned with this right here, because right now we know from right here down, this thing's bitching. From right here up, this thing's bitching. The only thing we're worried about is this 1-inch strip right here. So I don't care what's going on over there or over here or up here. I'm only going to concentrate on the area where I'm working. That's the same thing with a patch panel or a roof insert or putting on a quarter panel. if you got it all fitting and everything is tits, the only thing you need to worry about is that 1 inch that's right there where you're welding. And if you pay attention to your scribe line and your witness marks, you won't have any problems. And don't be afraid if it starts getting crazy to go back and cut your tacks loose and reposition it. We're just cutting this line snips, splitting it right down the middle. If there's a bobble in it, follow the bobble. As you can see, I'm going past where the clecos were, so we're going to lose that support from the cleco. So now we've got to trust our cut line and our witness marks, because our cleco holes that we were depending on to get set up are now gone. As you can see, we've got our lines, and you can see that if it's tilted too much one way or the other, it could really screw us up. That's why we have to trust our trim line. You'll notice right here, this wasn't perfect there, and it's not perfect here, but when they line up, they're tight. So it doesn't matter if it's not laser ass straight. We got everything cut and trimmed. Now we're going to put it together. Like you can see, I've only got 1 clamp on the end. My first witness mark is lined up. My second mark's really close. There it is, it's tits right there. I'm going to put 1 tack right there, and then another tack right here. If you'll notice at the end down here, it's not even together, and I don't care. Doesn't matter. I'm not worried about that end right now. I'm worried about back here. We're just going to go in order. Boom, 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 boom. The rod that we use is 023 MIG wire. All MIG welding wire, no matter the size, is an ER70S6, which has the most deoxidizing properties in the wire. I use a 023. I just pull it off the spool, straighten it up, because I'm not wanting to add a bunch of metal in there. Because if you add a bunch of metal and you got a big ridge, you got to go back and sand it off or file it off or grind it off. We've got 3 tacks in. Our witness marks are lined up perfect. Now, if you're patient and you use your tacks to your advantage, every time this thing gets hot and cools off, what's it doing? It shrinks. So you see how it's real tight there? It's loose here, and I can get my rod in it. Okay, I'm going to hit a tack here. It's going to shrink, and it's going to pull that together, and you'll actually be able to see it on the film. So I'm going to tack it. Okay, that actually got wider. Now it's closing up, see it? Then the only thing I have to check is my height. I just kind of tweak that like that. I'm going to go right there where it's touching. Put another tack. It's going to cool. It opened up first, it expanded. Now it's going to cool. That's going to close up. So heat is our friend. Heat's our friend when you're tacking. The other thing is, sometimes you'll be tacking like you're putting a panel inside of a panel, and you tack it and it gets too tight. You know, it won't fit anymore. Well, what happens is this is shrunk so much that these are actually trying to overlap each other. So what you have to do is you go in there and you got to hammer and dolly your tacks, stretch them back out, and then everything will fall back in place. It's just always remembering that you've got control over everything. The more patient you are with it, the easier it is to do. As you can see, we methodically went from back to front and got it tacked together. Let's get our calipers and check it, see if it's cool. Oh, perfect, all the way across. So this exercise is kind of just to show the importance of your scribe line, your witness mark, your trim, starting at one end and methodically going all the way to the other end, showing you how heat from the tacks is your friend. So you can close that gap up. You know, you don't have to, if you start panicking about this gap, so it's too big. But you know your trim, but that goes back to, you have to trust that trim line. You want everything to fit perfect, because if you go back and you cut it loose and you start grinding back and then you're welding it together, when you're finished, you're going to find out that what you just did was completely the opposite of what you wanted. What I generally like to do is I weld anywhere from 3 inches to a foot, and then hammer and dolly that area, and weld some more and hammer dolly that. Using the 023 rod that we talked about earlier, you can see I'm not going to be depositing much metal into the weld, and because it doesn't need any, because it's basically a fusion. This right here, enough deoxidizer in here to make a nice weld, and so I'm going to weld a little bit more, hammer and dolly a little bit more, and then I'll go back and fill the old Cleco holes. Before I get to sanding, so I don't erase it, I'm going to go ahead and transfer this line that we had made earlier onto the door skin so we know where our handle is going to go. So it's just getting back to that line we had scribed, and then we'll just put a little scribe here like this, a little transfer. And then what we'll do is we'll take our master door skin, that with our door skin in place, those lines line up perfectly in the center of those holes. This is basically where the trim line is going to be for the door. When we flange it, we'll have that right there. By holding this up here, still matches this original part where the lower bead is. It's all bitching. We didn't get a wobble in it, so it's great. I'm just going to hit it with this 80 grit paper on a DA and clean that right up. So there you go, we got our upper door skin and our lower skin joined together right down the middle of the bead. Bead's nice and straight, nice and flat, correct width. We didn't lose any of our contour. Pretty bitchin'. So next we'll do a couple of little repairs, and then we're going to flange it and put it on the door frame, and we'll have a finished door.